Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's new social environment. Today, we have the absolute pleasure of being joined by two poets, our host, Bob Holman, and our guest, Hettie Jones. I'm Madeline, and I'll be your MC today, so just a few quick notes before we get started. We'll be recording this meeting for the Rail archive. If you would prefer to not be seen, you can disable your camera by pressing the stop video button in the bottom left corner. We're going to keep the audience on mute until question time, which I'll kick off at about 1:45. If you have any questions for Hettie or for Bob while we are talking, please put them in the chat bar to your right. It would also be great if you could introduce yourself there too and say where you're tuning in from. Lewis will be helping out with tech if you have any questions, so you can chat him. Lewis, if you want to just give a little wave right now. And closed captions are available. You can turn them on at the bottom. So just quickly a bit about our host today, Bob, and I'll let Bob take it away after this to introduce Hettie. But Bob founded the Bowery Poetry Club and has served as the coordinator of the St. Mark's Poetry Project and as the co-director, and slam master of the Nuyorican Poets Cafe. He's currently the co-founder and co-director of the Endangered Language Alliance. Bob is also the author of numerous collections of poetry, most recently Life Poem and The Unspoken, and has written and featured in two films for PBS, The United States of Poetry and Language Matters with Bob Holman. Thank you guys so much, and Bob, on to you.
Wow, well, hi everybody, and thank you for staying home and being on your computer. Whoa, what can I say? It's so terrific to have Hettie Jones be with us. We spent a lot of time yesterday, Hettie, if you recall, trying to figure out how to get you onto Zoom. And we couldn't. There are just some people, I don't know, Hettie, what do you think it is?
Well, the thing is, I was just about to buy a new computer that would do all these wonderful things when everything collapsed. The stores closed, everything happened, and I couldn't do it. And so here I am with a 6-year-old computer that really, it doesn't want to do what I want it to do. I'm very sorry. The next time you ask, I might have a new computer. That is, if we can ever go to the store again.
Okay, well, we'll leave that question up in the air for later. Maybe the viewers, the participants, the audience, the ear and eyes can inform us of that. But the question here is, what are you talking on right now?
What am I talking about?
No, on. What
I'm talking on my landline.
Right.
That's antediluvian, a landline.
Does it have a rotary dial?
No.
Okay.
It's not that bad.
We got that straight. Okay, I'm going to try to introduce you right now, okay?
Okay.
Hettie Jones is the mother of us all. She's the queen of the scene if you live downtown or if you've ever heard the word downtown. She has lived in her apartment for the last 57 years?
58.
Gotcha. 58 years. And I insist that you go down and take a look at this from the outside because her apartment, her building, looks like the little brownstone that could. The what's the name of the Standard Hotel wraps completely around Hettie's building, and it was Hettie who stood up and said, "I'm not moving. You guys can build it around me." And not only did they do that, they took over the ground floor and put their lobby there, right under Hettie. So that's who she is. She also is the author of these books. I don't need to hold them up, but How I Became Hettie Jones is an absolute essential read for everybody. How I Became Hettie Jones is the first view that we had of the beats and the boho scene during those days of downtown from a woman's perspective. And it's just an extraordinary opening of culture to see this. She and her husband then, Leroy Jones, Amiri Baraka, were the founders of the Yugon magazine and press. And it wasn't until she was 64 that she started publishing her poems. Unbelievable. And the first book that she published, Drive, which I think she's going to be reading from today, won an award. Which award was it? It was a big award.
Yeah, I've really forgotten it. Oh, wait a minute. It says so on the Norma Farber First Book Award from the Poetry Society of America in 1999.
Naomi Shihab Nye, who I hope is watching with us here today, is a person who is a poet who picked that book. And here's what I had to say about it. Here's where Hettie Jones makes her move. Remember, she's winning the first book prize at 64. Makes her move, pulls into the passing lane, floors us. Poem stretching back to 68, forward to the last exit. They define neither place nor route nor chunk of art. Instead, they define a woman, a poet, whose life has been lived, speed limitless and love limitless. Trust, generosity, politics and risk, words that tumble content all over, barely stopping to be language, busy as they are connecting humans. So scoot over and let Hettie Jones take the wheel. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to.
Wow, I had forgotten all those encomiums.
So, Hettie, where do you want to start? You know, we've done the building. You want to talk about what's going on in the building right now, or someplace when you were born, or your two daughters, your wonderful daughters, or I don't know.
Oh, wow. Well, you know, this should encourage anyone who thinks they come from nowhere. I'm a little girl from Queens. There were no books in my house. I was suspect for reading when I was a kid. My father used to say, "Oh, he's got her nose in a book." But eventually I just grew out of that and fell in love with writing as a means of self-expression. I'm left-handed, so everything I painted was blurry from my hand being dragged across it. But the words, just words, and they were close to music, which was my first love. So I just sort of gravitated from music to words, and that's why poetry became so important, because it puts together those two things, both rhythm and meaning, and that really appealed to me. So I guess that's how it started, but also it just felt good.
Well, can't think of a better reason to be writing poetry. As William Carlos Williams says, if it ain't a pleasure, it ain't a poem. And your life, Hettie, has given so many people pleasure. Why don't we dive in in prison? Because prison's a really important issue these days. And you taught at Bedford Hills for how long?
Oh, at least a dozen years, maybe even more, until it became impossible, until I didn't have a car anymore and I couldn't drive up there, I think. But I had gotten started through a friend of mine named Janine Palmy Vega, who taught at Sing Sing. And she invited me to go to Sing Sing one day because I was teaching nearby, and I found that the students were so willing and so much in need of the joy of writing, and that I just fell for it. And then I've forgotten exactly who said to me, "Have you ever thought about teaching women?" And I thought, yeah, women in prison. And then I was teaching nearby Bedford Hills, and I applied to volunteer. That sounds so funny, but nobody was paying me. Anyway, then I got to know a whole group of women at the Bedford Hills prison, and I stayed there for, at least a dozen years or more. And they just loved writing, and it made me so happy to be able to go there. Sometimes I was teaching at SUNY Purchase, and I would bring the very same lesson from my casa purchased to the prison and then exchange work between those two groups.
Oh, wow.
And that was fun.
Yeah.
It was fun for all of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's my prison story.
Well, and the anthology that came out of your days there.
Oh yeah, it's called More In Than Out.
Right.
So you can tell, that's what that was. Yeah.
More In Than Out, which is a poem by Karen White, I believe, that people can see up on my YouTube channel that was taped in the prison at Bedford Hills. And am I right that, and of course, to hear you say that you were a volunteer in those days, which was sort of the way we did things at that time, the economy was not so strangling or strangled. You volunteered, you worked for 12 years. Now there's things like the Bard Prison Program, which
That's right.
I helped to start when I was up at Bard there. And they have a show on PBS that you can see the work that you did, that you pioneered, how it's continuing now and so important.
Yeah.
And I understand that you had a visit from two of your former students recently.
Oh, yes. And to see them on the street calling me, and I don't, sometimes my doorbell doesn't work, so people would just yell up, Hettie, Hettie, Hettie. And there they were, Judy Clark and Kathy Boudin, just coming to visit me after all these many years, and to see them not in their prison uniforms or just to see them on the street of New York. I can weep just thinking about how happy it made me. It was so wonderful. And then for them to climb the stairs to my apartment that, that they knew all about, because I had always talked about where I lived and how many stairs I had to climb, etc. And to see them here, that was just amazing. Amazing. Hope they're listening today.
Yes. Well, I think it's, there's so many ways in which you were a pioneer, but I would say that being a woman held you back from taking your place in the public about that. You want to talk about those early days? For example, when Allen Ginsberg and Peter Orlovsky lifted the chair in your living room that's still there, and the entire party had to get underneath it, but nobody would take off their clothes except for Peter and Allen. That's a good place to start, isn't it?
Yes, it's a lovely memory being carried around like that. But most of the time, I was a little more decorous, let's say, But we did have a lot of fun, and when we came here, we started Eugen Leroy Amiri, Leroy/Amiri. I always feel compelled to call him by both of his names. We both felt that we could do a magazine and a press because we worked for, and that was how we met, a magazine called The Record Changer, which was run by a guy named Dick Hadlock, and he dealt with sending old 78 RPM records out to people who collected them. And he was a friend of mine, and I worked for him as sort of his secretary. And when we had to hire a shipping manager, as we called it, in walked Leroy. And that was how it started, because we both knew how the essence of magazine production. I had also done that when I was in college. We were able to start Eugen. We knew exactly what to do and how to type it out. And we used to have stapling parties where we all sat in a row, assembled the pages of Eugen, and then the last person in line was the stapler who stapled the spine, and that was the job that everyone coveted.
The collating parties need to have their own book,
Yeah, right.
Because that's what it was. It was run off on a mimeograph machine usually, right?
That's right. That's how it started. And then when we had enough copies, Leroy would take them around to all the village bookstores. I believe there were at least 3, and ask, would you sell this for us? And that's how we got to be known. We had a few people in Chicago that we knew whose poetry we published, and they did the very same. We sent them maybe 5 or 10 copies, and they would take it around to the bookstores, and same in San Francisco. So we got to be known. And then after we did so well with Eugen, we started publishing books under the publishing house called Totem Press. And a friend of ours made a nice little logo for it with a bunch of faces. So we were Totem Press, and those we did. I think we published 5 or 6 or 10 books, which of course made their way to the internet, and you can buy them for what seems like hundreds of dollars now, But we had a lot of fun. We always had parties to do that.
Right. So, and you want to just tell us some of the names of the poets? Did you publish Charles Olson, say?
Oh, yes, of course. We were friends with Charles Olson through Edward Dorn, and eventually went up to visit Charles. But Charles was a great supporter of ours because he believed in young people and new people who were just beginning to acquaint the rest of the country with what was going on in the little enclaves, like in Gloucester, Massachusetts, and in Chicago and San Francisco, as well as New York. So Charles was a great supporter. He had been at Black Mountain College and knew Basil and Martha King and those people who then became friends of ours and helped put the magazine together, and we published some of their books, little chapbooks.
Right.
It isn't hard. Everybody should do it.
I think people are still doing that, though the mimeograph machines are sort of getting dusty. But the thing that I'm sort of driving at here is how the Black Mountain poets, the Beats, the New York school that we think these days of as really diverse scenes was really one scene back in those days. That Leroy really crossed over. Frank O'Hara wrote poems to him, and Allen Ginsberg called him up from his deathbed and asked him if he wanted any money.
That's true.
So. Could you talk to that a little bit? The different scenes that were around.
Well, the only thing I will, there's a little bit of a caveat. There weren't that many women. The women were always somewhat ancillary. The only woman I can think of that we published was Diane DePrima. But there were other women who were just beginning to make their voices known. That we were growing out of a very sexist time, and people didn't believe that women had a voice. It had been lost, I think, in the 20s and 30s when everybody went back after the First World War to go and have babies and live in the suburbs and that kind of thing. But we were just then really coming back. Barbara Guest is another woman that I could think of that was there early on. But there weren't that many women.
Right.
And I'm glad to see more.
Right. Barbara Guest has always been left out of the New York school, as they call it. And Ron Padgett actually has said that she is, apologized that Barbara is definitely, the fifth poet, along with Ashbery and Koch and Schuyler and O'Hara.
Yeah, that's right. I met Barbara because I was fortunate to have a job after the record changer closed, I used that bona fide to get a job at Partisan Review. And then eventually I was running the office of Partisan Review, where Barbara was the poetry editor. And through her, I met a number of other people that we published in Eugen as well.
Yeah. So let's just put on our flip flops and flop over to what's going on right now. What you're teaching at the new school, are you doing that virtually these days?
Well, fortunately, I got it down after teaching at the new school for many years. I finally got to the graduate writing department. I've graduated. So I only teach one semester, and I always taught writing, but now the last class I taught was very interesting. It was a history of the whole Lower East Side literary scene. And that was pretty interesting because I had to do my research and think about all of those old times. And that was pretty delightful to assemble and do. But I only usually teach the fall semester, and then I counsel graduates who need a thesis advisor and stuff like that. But I also have a community group, my mom's group, that is a group of women on the Lower East Side who meet. It started at the Lower East Side Girls Club. And when they asked me, I said, oh, I'd love to teach girls. And they said, the director said, no, we want you to teach the moms of the girls. So that's how it started. And I've been doing that for, about 6 or 7 or 8 years already. And we move from place to place, but we're still a group of moms. And it's quite wonderful. I like teaching in the community. And especially I like teaching people who have never thought about writing or themselves and never had a chance or the time to express themselves or given the tools. And that is wonderful because, everybody has a voice, and everybody, if you give them just a few hints, they'll use it.
Well, we like your voice. This
Thank
would be
you.
a perfect segue to your poems.
Okay.
We've got so much to talk about. Why don't you read your poems and we'll come back and talk a little bit. Let's hear the voice.
Okay.
Let's hear the voice of Hettie Jones.
Okay. I'm going to start reading from my first poetry book published in 1999. I love looking at that number. And it's called Welcome to Our Crowd. I've slept in every room except the kitchen, and that includes alone or with others in symphony or cacophony. Now the man in his socks, the one asleep on his own pillow, the tender lover, curious youth, bossy fuck. All these clothed and naked visions are sharing particular angles of light, the rushed or lingering presence of time. They hang off the splintering beams. On the uneven floor, we all lie down in layers, a hologram of lovers, his pillow under another one's head, the constant drift of old perfume, a jacket left behind on a chair, shoes later buried with the dead. They needed heels. The jacket is minus a button, torn sheets, the windows unwashed. We breathe and don't breathe, lie, pass in the hall, fall into all our arms, live again, gone soon. That was Welcome to Our Crowd. Let's see what else I have.
Everybody's applauding you, by the way.
Everybody is applauding me. Oh, thank you. That's very lovely.
There's even a standing ovation from some people. For one poem. I don't think that's ever happened before.
That's really nice. I have my list here. Oh, I wanted to read a sort of a memorial poem called Freddie in Memoriam, if I can find the page. Oh, here it is. Let's see. Freddie in Memoriam. I used to know a man who'd fix the roof or the car or my cunt or whatever else needed attention. But now he's dead. Someone shot him through the heart. And ever since, my heart sinks when I touch the small switch on my bathroom light. For he could hold with his large, graceful, hardened hands a 2-inch screwdriver, 1-inch switch. On the toilet seat, laughing his death was not an issue, the switch was. But now it's on me. I switch roles, I fix the roof. I have to love myself the way I never did before. That was Freddie in memoriam. But you know, I'm a New Yorker, so of course I have to read a poem about the subway, and that I have to find on page 64. It's a very short poem, and it's just for this weather. Subway poem. Yo, spring! We need weather, baby. We need tulips, lilacs, dandelions in the grass, and your sweet ass. Let's see. Those are all the ones I wanted to read from Drive. That was my first book. All of these, by the way, were published by Hanging Loose Press, and they did a very nice job.
Shout out to Bob Hirschon.
That's right. Shout out to Bob Hirschon. Then my second book, I never thought I would live to see a second book, but there it really is. I have to read a poem called April, because after all, it is April, is it not? Oh, really? If I can find the page, sorry. I thought I had it all marked out, but here it is. Yes, it is. April. One robin, one yellow willow, love braving the rain on the wrong highway. Honestly, I don't know what to think. A Canada goose, a headlong cloud. Open the window. Under my hand, your wet skin. You looking? 30 April mornings, one white tulip, one red, one precise interior, one persistent stem. Cherry blossom, silver bridge. Don't ever take my sweet for weak. Peaches, peaches. April has no way to get there yet. Quiet room, roaring sky. April, I'm almost over you again. That was from All Told, and I'll read one more from that. Is that okay?
Yes, that's fine, or whatever.
Okay, all right. I'm looking for the one on page 12. Oh, I am left-handed, and those of you out there who are left-handed will know that you have to think about things differently and make your way in this world by acknowledging that you're never going to be a right-handed person, so you really have to adjust. This is called 5 on the left-hand side. Bob Dylan and Queen Victoria, born the same day. Ditto for Marilyn Monroe and Cleavon Little. Yesterday, Cole Porter. Today, Judy Garland. Numerous admirable left-handers conspire in my sinister ambitions. Our labors require experiment and the risk always of failure. In a world of can openers, doorknobs, shoelaces, screwdrivers, we learn early to make our own ways. Early, we learn new twists. That was 5 on the left-hand side. Want to ask me more questions?
Yes, how did you know? But first, let's have that more applause for Hettie That's just sensational, Hettie. Love those poems. Love those poems.
Did you ever know that there were that many people who were left-handers? I did a lot of research to.
I can tell that you did a lot of research, not only to find people who were left-handed, but who had the same birthdays. Are you kidding me? Who could do
I know.
that? Is real academic hardcore work you're doing there.
That's right. I cannot remember how I found it out, but I did.
This was maybe even before Google.
Oh, way before Google, let me tell you. Before anybody even had Google in mind, before the Googlers had Google in mind.
Let's talk about the building again. I can't get away from the little brownstone that could. I understand you're having some problems with the apartment just below you these days.
Oh, wow, yes. Well, my neighbor of 45 years just left under varying circumstances, but now the apartment is being renovated, which of course had never happened before because this building was built in 1845, by the way, if I may, thanks to a neighbor of mine named Sally Young, who did all the research to find out that this building was built 1845 by a cartman, and the cartmen were the precursors to the team. They had a union, the precursors to the Teamsters. They were the guys who took their horse and buggies to either river because everything that came into the island of Manhattan had to come by boat. There were no bridges in 1845, so now I'm blanking on his name. That's a shame. But he went to the river, or as did all of the cartmen, and got everything and all the supplies and even the lumber for this place came in by boat from wherever they knocked down the trees and made the lumber. So that's how I know about the fact that this building was built in 1845, and it still has old beams in it that really look like trees, because I've taken off the plaster from time to time in the 58 years, and I believe his name was Christopher Pinckney. That was his name, Mr. Pinckney, who built this building. That's all I know about him. He was a cartman.
Well, there was cartman. Let's bring it a little more up to date. So they're still working on the apartment during the pandemic?
Well, I probably shouldn't have said that.
Oh, never mind. Let's not ask that question. Okay, but I would like to say who lived in that apartment was...
Well, Archie Shep lived there with his family. In the building, Elizabeth Murray lived here.
Yes. I thought she took over Archie's apartment.
Well, she lived on the first floor.
Oh, okay.
And but maybe she lived on the second floor first. You know, people moved around. When they got tired of living on one floor and the other floor became vacant. I'm the only person who took the top floor and never moved out of it, mostly because the stairs to the roof are in my apartment. And so I could go up on the roof, and had a big garden there in the days before the new roof had to be put on because the dirt sort of sank in or something or other, or whatever. But I grew all kinds of wonderful things up there. You can grow things in New York that you never expect to grow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know I had bees on my roof for a long time. That's an Elizabeth Murray painting behind me, everybody. And she also did the cover for Hettie's second book, All Told.
That's right. Oh, I'm looking at it now. It's a wonderful, wonderful. It looks like it might have been, you know, when Elizabeth did certain things, she had a marvelous individual perspective on things. And so when she painted, nothing looked exactly the way it was, but you couldn't figure out whether you were looking at something from above or below or both at once. It was really, I think she was a marvelous, marvelous painter. And the way I met her was that she was my kids' teacher at Downtown Community School when they were in elementary school. And that's how we met Elizabeth, and that's how I know Bob.
And
Yay.
yes, and those kids now, Kelly's still involved in the art world.
Yes, she has written books about art, and is a bona fide MacArthur genius, which is totally amazing. And she teaches art history at Columbia. But Lisa, my other daughter, I hate to say other daughter, I would say my second daughter, or it's hard to describe. When you have two, you always want to make them equal in many ways. But
I know all about it.
yes, I know you do. But Lisa has worked with Spike Lee and is the author of at least one of his books about the making of the movie. But she worked with him for quite some time and has written a memoir as well. So everybody here learned, to use their voices. I think that was one of the most wonderful things about living here. All of us knew each other, and our kids had marvelous times sliding down the banisters, because there are a lot of stairs here and a lot of nice banisters to slide down. So they would congregate in the hall and have a sliding down the banister party. Especially for rainy days, it was an excellent activity.
So, Hettie, your archives, you were meticulous in keeping your archives, or maybe you just did it later on. What's going on with your archives?
My archive, I just saved things because I guess I had some sense of letters and everything, that all of the materials for the making of the magazines and the books that we published. I felt, because I had worked at Partisan Review, and I had also worked prior to that at the a branch of Columbia University, actually one of the very first film libraries. It was called the Center for Mass Communication, and they did pamphlets and things like that. And I began to understand how important it was to keep a record of what one did in the art world, and it was a very new and growing art world. So I saved everything, and then when it was overflowing the file cabinets, etc., somebody came to help me, and we organized everything, and then sent it off to the Rare Book Library at Columbia University. And there it is, and one can go to the library and look through everything from that time. And I'm happy that it's saved, because looking through the actual things is very inspiring to young people. I think it gives you an idea of what you can do with a pencil and a piece of paper. A lot of the work that people sent us, if they didn't have a typewriter in those years before computers, they just write everything out by hand. And so we have handwriting and letters from people like that. And I think it's a way to save civilization, and to know how far we've come in our devotion to our computers, which I'm not knocking. I like mine too.
So I just want to reiterate, what a great story. Wow. But how accessible are the archives up at Columbia? Can anybody who's watching here go up there and check out the handwriting of Charles Olson, say?
Oh, he had a wonderful handwriting, by the way. Yes, indeed. Yes, I think if you have a bona fide research reason, you can go to the rare book library. I'm quite sure. If that's wrong, I will check with Kelly to find out whether that's indeed possible. But I do think if you have a project that requires research and you want to use the what the library has to offer, I'm quite sure you can make an arrangement with Columbia University. It's just called the Rare Book Library, and if you look it up, I'm sure you can find a phone number. I don't have that at hand, but I'm sure anybody who would like to access it. Also, I think to make donations of things that have validity and reference to anything literary that went on in the 20th century, you might contact Columbia and ask if they take donations, which I'm quite sure they do. Because people save things and then maybe, if you're listening, say maybe your kids won't know why you saved a particular letter or a form of any kind, and it might be worthwhile to donate to a library.
Good point, Hetty. And I'm sure everybody that's listening to you now is inventing their project that will get them into the library. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I've been looking at the group chat here, which is really extraordinary. What an audience you have. We can talk about that later. But the names, oh my goodness. But there's a question here that looks really good, and it might be a good question to sort of move us into the absolute nowness of it. It comes from Catherine Olson. It goes, as a poet with a great sensitivity to language, what do you think of the militaristic, well, somebody just moved me. Why did they do that? Oh, there it is. The militaristic and wartime language that's being used to describe COVID-19 right now. How can poetry help mediate communication right now? Great question.
Oh, that's a wonderful question. Well, first of all, the virus doesn't come from a war. The virus doesn't come from failure. The virus is is something that develops in the natural world, and it doesn't deserve to be fought on that. It deserves to be treated. And that is a whole different approach. That's a medical approach. If you have appendicitis, nobody says, well, we have to fight that. If you have a broken leg, nobody says, we have to fight that. This is just something that has developed and we've breathed in. There have been pandemics, there have been viruses prior, and the only thing that's different now is that now we know what it is and we have a name for it. Prior to that, I mean, the world that in 1918 didn't know very much about these things, although they had always existed. And they didn't know how to isolate people or how people caught things. So the fact that we have so many more avenues for communication and so many ways to learn things and so many ways to protect ourselves now, that's a good thing. Television and radio and everything that we use to connect, and even the very telephone on which I am speaking, is a way that we can learn from each other. And I think that's why everybody knows about this virus now, because we are watching out for one another. I think that's really the secret of it all. We are watching out for one another, even if the other is across the other side of the world. I think that's a wonderful thing that we're all connected in that way, for good or for ill, and let's hope it's always for good.
Amazing. Hettie, thank you so much. This is just so lovely to hear. I also just received a question from Janet. So Janet, I'm going to unmute you right now if you want to ask your question.
This Janet?
Yes, is this right,
Oh,
Janet?
yes. I wanted to ask Hettie if she could contrast the partisan review moment with with the one that she helped to succeed at. I met her in the tower. I don't know if this is the building you live in now, but you lived with then Leroy Jones in a tower overlooking Lafayette Street, I think, and you had all the Eugen manuscripts all over the place. And Erica Monk, who was my boss then, hired me to do subscriptions at the Partisan Review, brought me to visit you. And it was one of those, never forget this moments. And I just wondered, and I also remembered, of course, that everybody who worked at Partisan Review had to schlep bags of books back for William Phillips, and that was the state of feminism. Can you contrast it? What did we do next after PR?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't get your name and
Janet Coleman. Janet Coleman. You probably know me better from WBAI.
Ah, yes, of course. Well, and your question was, how do we schlep things along now?
Yeah, well, what were the steps between schlepping and writing our own poems?
The fact that one would, especially in my case, working around, I wasn't writing when I worked at Partisan Review, but every day I was reading more and more, and that's how I spent my lunchtime in the little one-room office that they had off Union Square, reading the best of the best, and getting all their words and their rhythms into my head. Because, as I may have mentioned, I came from a home with no books. And I was criticized for being such a reader, and what would I get there? But that is how we pass things along, and that's why I wanted to do Eugen and all the totem books and everything like that. It's passing along, passing the word, offering language to everybody, which I think we did. And we have so many more tools now to do that. And people are reading. If you're on the internet, you're not always looking at pictures, you're reading things. And I think that encourages young people to be able to read even faster than they can. I have a little granddaughter. Well, she's not so little anymore, but I have some great grandchildren who have just begun to read, and their grandparents, my children, have bought them computers, little kid computers, so that they can learn to use language and originate and put down their own words in their own way. And I think that's just wonderful. We expand the language, we expand the word in that way, so that, or what we always called ordinary people who weren't literate or literary could express themselves. I never had a teacher when I was a kid in elementary school that encouraged me to write poems, but now that happens. I've seen it with my own eyes. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful change that we have all these tools. I hope that answers your question.
That answers another question. It's good enough.
Wow. Well, ask me another. Here I am.
I'm seeing a question now from Megan in the chat. So Megan, I'm gonna unmute you right now. 1 second. There, that should work.
Hi, Hettie. Thank you so much for this lovely talk. This has been, one of the most uplifting things of my week is hearing you read your work. I love that line about April and being over it or not over it again.
Yeah, thank you.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about your neighborhood, since it seems like your neighborhood acts as a kind of beloved in many of your poems, but also in your talk that you've mentioned today. And I wanted to ask, amidst gentrification, amidst things that have sort of happened, changes that have occurred in the East Village, what has remained constant for you about the neighborhood? What about the East Village feels constant in its sort of mythology? Thank you.
Oh, what a nice question. Thank you so much. Well, first of all, the architecture remains the same because nothing really has changed all that much. A few tall buildings have sort of shot up from hither to yon, but none of the old, in my walks around the streets, I haven't noticed that anything has been destroyed. Maybe one or two buildings that were really falling apart have gone, but largely in my immediate neighborhood, say Fifth and Sixth, all the way to Houston Street, everything is exactly the same as it was when I got here. So that it's a neighborhood of not much density. And as you know, I used to have dogs, and of course, dog walkers always exchange greetings when they're on the street together because their dogs like to talk to each other as well. And so I have always known the people who live around the corner and have had the privilege of watching people grow old as though I lived in a small town. There's a reason they call it the East Village. When I first moved here, it was just called the Lower East Side. It wasn't called the East Village. And then it became a village because, well, I think because of the real estate, people like to call it a village, and that encouraged people to move here. But it became an artist's refuge, and I've had the privilege of watching young artists grow old and to see how we handle that, and to watch the old people who lived on the block um, before we got here accept us, and then live their lives and in some kind of friendly way, and then pass away. So it does feel like living in a small town. I remember the old ladies. I had two children, one kind of right after the other, so they both fit, and we're all small, so they both fit in the same big baby carriage. And I was pushing them down the street, and the old ladies who lived around here was so happy that even the bohemians had children that they welcomed me. So, and there, there's a lot to compliment the East Village for. There's the St. Mark's Poetry Project. There's the Bowery Poetry Club. There are a lot of institutions that have been here they're getting old now, and they maintain themselves and welcome young people too. So it has but it become a village by being called a village in a certain way. Does that answer your question? Yes?
She's muted, but she's putting her thumb up, Megan is. So I believe
That's good. I'm so sorry I can't see you. I have an old computer that I was just about to exchange for a new computer before all of this happened. So I'm a little bit behind the times, but next time you'll be able to see me.
Hettie, it's Madeline here again. And on a related note, I was actually just curious if you could speak briefly about how motherhood and having children shaped your creative practice and your identity as a writer.
Oh, having children. Oh my goodness. Well, first of all, I I never really thought about having children when, you know, I was in college and whatever. I mean, but then there I was, and then I had one, and then I had two. It seemed like it happened, but I found that it was such a great delight to see these young, these amazing creatures grow into people who spoke and people who had desires. I had never thought about having children, but when they happened, I just thought they were something akin to a miracle. And even the fact that they didn't look so much like me didn't matter to me. They were, I thought, the most delightful creatures. And to watch a child grow and to learn and to offer them activity that they enjoyed and watch them grow and prosper in some way. It had more to do, of course, it had first to do with love, but then secondly, it had to do with amazement as to the human condition and respect for what a brain could, what children could do for themselves, and respect for their intelligence, and to watch their thinking processes grow. I still am amazed, I think, by children, all children. I hope that answers it. It's been a delight. And besides, they're a lot of fun.
Yes. So I think we have time for about 2 more questions before we end with a poem. So now I'm going to go to Philip. Philip, I'm unmuting you now. Philip, are you on?
Yes, hi. This is kind of a little bit from left field, but I thought I'd ask if you have any experiences with musicians or composers that you might like to share with the audience.
Oh, well, thank you for asking that. Because music was my entry into art, my parents got a piano when I was about 4. It was allegedly for my sister who was older, but she wasn't really interested. But I really took to that piano. And so I could play notes before I could read, and I could make sounds before I knew anything about them. And so my parents saw that I liked it so much that they agreed to give me piano lessons. And so I just fell in love with music as a way to express feelings. And I was always noodling around. And I remember when I was a kid and just fooling around on the piano, and my mother would be in the kitchen, which was somewhat adjacent, and she'd sometimes walk in and say, "That doesn't sound like practicing." But I was always inventing things on the piano. And one of my happiest moments after I was a grown person and lived here on the 4th floor of this building on Cooper Square, that somebody was giving a piano away and wouldn't charge if I paid to have it taken away. And so I have no idea where I got the money from, but the idea of having my very own piano after so many years of not having one, I paid a hoist to lift up this upright piano, an old upright piano, lifted up 4 floors with a hoist and take it in through the window, which had to be taken out to admit it. And now I have had a piano, an old upright Sommer piano, which is very good, Sohmer. I've had this for years and I play it almost every night, just play and play and play. And you know, music is, it, it soothes the soul. Somebody has a beautiful poem about that. If music be the food of love, play on. Or I know I am not saying this properly, but music means as much. I never was proficient. I passed the test for music in art high school, but it was too far to go to the Bronx from Laurelton, Long Island. So I never did go there, but still I love it, you know. I don't know where I would be without music. Isn't there a song that goes like that? Where would we be without music? I hope that answers your question. But I
Yes,
do
thank
play
you.
my piano every night.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Hettie. And for our last question, we're going to go to Fong and then hopefully end with one more poem, if that would be okay.
Okay.
Fong, I'm unmuting you right now.
Fong, are you there?
I'm here. Thank
Yes.
you, Hettie. This is so amazing.
Aw.
Thank you. All the great questions. My question is super simple because it has to do with your memoir when it was given to me by Dory Aston, because her children went to the same school with your children. So you knew Dory, and Dory handed me that book in 1999. I read it in one weekend. Just loved it. And what my is very simple, because the issue of race has been a perpetual agony in the US. And I remember when I discovered that it was Lewis Allen, whose that's the state's name. His real name is Abel Melropo, a Jew, grew up in the Bronx, went to City University, went to Harvard, but decidedly go back to the Bronx and taught at DeWitt High School. And he wrote the song Strand Fruit, made popularized by Billie Holiday and later Nina Simone. And it was really the subject having to do with once African-American and Jew were together. They fought together because they were being discriminated. My issue is that it went all the way to the 50s, the so-called the American century, coined by Henry Luce as early as 41, anticipate that the US will be the next empire replaced the British Empire. So the issue of race still perpetuated, is more intense. So my question is this: when you married to Leroy Jones, the great Amiri Baraka, in the memoir, you told that very clear story of how difficult it was for that cross-racial barrier that you experienced. Can you share with us a little bit about that?
Well, it was difficult for the outside world. It wasn't difficult for me because, I don't know how difficult. I can't ask him. He's gone, and but we liked each other. We felt so equal. We worked well together. That's how we met, as I mentioned. And we felt that we could do things together. And that, and that as well as our physical attraction, because we were both kind of little people. And we just blended in that way. We didn't really have arguments about things, and we got on with each other, and everybody knows. And I had gone to college in the South, as I mentioned, in Virginia, and that was the first time I had ever experienced prejudice as a Jew. And I was kind of amazed oh, because I grew up, you know, Jews lived together with Jews, although I went to school with other people. The people that I knew were only Jews. That's how I was brought up. So I understood how groups clung to one another for just for safety's sake, and um, my only experience with prejudice came when I went down south. I had never been, as I wrote in my book, any farther south than Freehold, New Jersey, where my uncle had a chicken farm. So it was a new experience, and I understood it from that point of view. I understood how when I went to claim my room, the people to whom I had been assigned randomly didn't want to live with me because I was a Jew.
Mhm.
And that helped me to understand a little bit of Leroy's situation,
Mhm.
and it also freed me to think that I could love him just as he was. I didn't care what, you know, it didn't matter to me. I understood what he went through when he walked out in the street, because I had that kind of experience. And then, of course, I learned when we walked together out in the street, you know, in 1957 or so, when we started seeing each other, you didn't see interracial couples except, you know, here and there. I think I saw one once, but people would stare at you, or, you know, one time we were walking through the village and someone began yelling at us. This was at night. And I started, you know, nobody yells at me. I turned around, I was ready to fight or yell or whatever. And Leroy pulled me back to him and he said, no, just keep walking, just keep walking. So I've always remembered that. That's from a long, long time ago, but I just keep walking. And when I walked with my children and people looked at us and they would think, especially because my kids were, eventually they were as tall as I was or taller. And you know, it's just keep walking. And, you know, whatever. I remember walking with my daughter Kelly along this very street one day, and people said something or other, and she just laughed. She said, "Oh, Mom, don't worry about it. They probably just thought we were dykes." so, so, you know, we qualified to be just about anybody,
Well,
you know.
thank you, Hettie. But you know, I meant to say that it caused you some pain because your parents were somewhat disapproval in the beginning. Am I right about that?
Oh yes, they really disapproved, but they eventually, especially my mother, came around. My father was slow to do that, but eventually he did also. And you know, I have one, you know, when my first daughter Kelly was born, I remember my mother standing at the nursery window and weeping, and I was so angry. I said, "You are crying about the first two layers of a person's skin, and that really has nothing to do with who they are." And then I remember one time she came to visit. We went to a restaurant. It was summertime, and she was sitting next to Kelly, and she patted Kelly's beautiful little brown thigh and said, "Oh, so soft." And you know, she had forgotten the color. She just thought it was soft. So I thought, I was encouraged by that, and I always remembered it because I feel that people can change and people can understand. Of course, nowadays, when you see interracial couples walking along the street, you just think, oh, there goes an interracial couple. And besides that, race is a construct. It was only created when Black people came to the United States, if you read the history very carefully. So anyway, I've never regretted a moment of it, not one moment.
Because it gives me sense of hope, because I think until African American and other race interracially marry, just like the Pole can marry to Italian, Italian can marry to British and whatnot, then we have less of the racial problem. So I'm pro interracial marriages. Thank you for you who have done it early on. So I will always be grateful to you and Leroy. Thank you.
Oh, you are entirely welcome. And the pleasure, I have to say, is mine.
Thank you so much, Hettie. And I think we'll end with a poem from Bob. Bob, if you want to read.
Oh, well,
Did you did? Or
yes,
however,
okay, I do. Not from this new book called The Unspoken, but it's a poem actually written when I was 20 years old, and that's what I look like. Life poem. Mike Tully did the cover from the Brooklyn Rail there, you know. So I'm gonna read just the beginning and the end, okay? Hettie,
Big hug and a kiss.
big hug. Desperate now, I've started to write down everything that comes into my head. I just lay it out right here as if the lined paper had become some sort of giant garbage disposal, accepting and grinding everything I can throw out. If this were a giant baseball game, this paper would be Willie Say-Hey Mays, great center fielder, making deliciously slow basket catches of every ball hit by every batter in either league. Why do we play such games? Can't we realize our bodies? You know, somebody once taught me to wash behind my ears, and now, years later, I've washed layer after layer of dirt and skin from behind my ears. Soon, I'll hit the bone. Now, that's good. Then I won't have to wash. I can polish. But sex is different, and our bodies become intrinsically awful things. Oh, to hold you is so sweet, yet you'll resist. Not even the wild tongs of bath oil and spray deodorants make me less the dirty thing. I confess, I think of your vagina and your little hair hump, and today I shall slick down my old hair and wear a suit of morning sun, visit you with daisy arm, and finally take you to bed. I know your mother never taught you these things, I'll whisper, and then off with my morning sun suit, and with only our body toys, commence to love on the quilt that took your grandmother 12 years to sew. Stop, go back, reread. Here you forgot these, the eyes. They've plopped down here. Put them in the right way, or else watch the inside of your mind. Poems cough and metaphors hide. Do parables describe or disguise? If I wrote in rhymes, would you read easier? If I didn't write at all, would you breathe easier? Do the words get in the way? Have you discovered yet that this is not a book? Poetry is a stance. Accept it and see. If you close your eyes and see the dancing spots, you will have created art. Should you open them to the world, you've created life. This life poem jogs along on the tip of your eyelash. Your witness. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, so much.
Thank you. Thank you. This
Thank
was
you,
just
Hettie.
wonderful.
Thank you, Hettie. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Flongsters.
Thank you. Thank you,
Yep,
Janet.
see you soon. Have a great weekend, everybody. Whatever
Thank you to everyone in attendance. We have a really exciting lineup next week, too. On Monday, we have Stanley Whitney joined by Tom McGlynn. It will be really great, 1 p.m. every day. Yeah, and I think actually we want to dedicate today's conversation to the bookstore, Spoonbill in Sugartown. Amazing friends of ours. We really love them. They're having a hard time out here. We'll send a link to send them some love in our chat. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Hettie.
Bye-bye.